Thank you for a beautiful introduction. I'll just get on to it. Good afternoon and good evening and good morning to everyone here as we meet in the in-between spaces of technology-inspired timelessness. To my cherished many friends, family who always show up, I feel you, I love you. A very special hello to the Cooper Unionists and their friends. It is lovely to meet you. Now, I want to report your Omar Berrada to you. I spent an entire year avoiding his message and inquiry, but in all the places I hid, his gentle method and inquiry materialized like Casper the Friendly Ghost, and each time with the best possible new dates. It happened so often that we became friends, at least I think so. And I do find it impossible to say no to friends. So here we are in more ways than one. Brave New World, 1984, Fahrenheit 451. We once read these as fiction, little knowing that these were prophecies. I hear now that the US government has set up a disinformation governance board. Ministry of Truth, are we trawling literature now? But most seriously, we are living witnesses, reluctant or not, to the ways the world's forces array themselves in some intense battle against truth and reality. What do we trust? How do we act? In the aftermath of a world seemingly dedicated to a course of ruin, despite capabilities of halting a descent into hell, what do we do? What legacies will a surviving generation inherit? And what will they have to say about those who lived short of the expectation of a high human ideal? Conceptually, by the way, this reflection is moved by different impulses, including those from art. I highlight just one, pluriversalism, as delineated by many thinkers, including Walter Mignolo and Carlos Santiago Gomez. Pluriversalism here means the majority world can and should deploy our powers of shape-changing, code switching, and inhabiting multiple worlds sometimes at the same time. It means we can activate and share our accesses to the ancient linkages bequeathed to you, to us, for ourselves, and maybe also for the world. This reflection. I do ask your pardon in advance, for this presentation comes not from well-formed thoughts, but from a sense of urgency. It is a prelude of a future anthem of this suddenly defiant coward. There has to be a limit to giving in to the liturgy of lunatics who conjure despair disguised as moral outrage, while they excuse their previous ecstasy or indifference over the wholesale slaughter of others that in closeted ways they do not regard as fully human. There is a limit, I think, to giving up this wounded and yet still beautiful earth and its humanity to forces that have refined the art of making a mockery of existence and its heirlooms. You know what I mean. So many of us make or live in or draw our lives from a sorted metropolis. And yet we know quietly that most of our gleaming sites and towers are edifices and necropolis, haunted homes built on the blood and wrath of unrequited ghosts who to our unease still hold us to account. A quarter of the time inside the cold splendor of our towns, we shudder at a sense of hauntedness. However, we have learned not to ask about who or what haunts us, why and how they do it, and what they want from us. To do so would be to challenge the shine of the gleaming lights and lies that refract in our public lives. And we will also not speak to the world of the ways we wake up wounded in invisible ways. For we are called to perform to the world our high per capita income perfections, aren't we? Is this fair to anyone? On April 21st, 2022, I happened upon a notice in The Guardian that the Tchaikovsky competition had been removed from the World Federation of International Music Competitions in response to, and I quote, Russia's brutal war and humanitarian atrocities in Ukraine. Only because the issue is so pervasive, let me state now that my position in this war is an African one. Diplomacy, we should give dialogue and peace a chance. I'm also a pacifist. I despise all wars with a visceral hatred. This does not make me a Putin apologist, as I was accused of being on Twitter. Nevertheless, one still must ask, where was the righteous moral outrage of the WFIMC as the nations of NATO, supported by allies, including Ukraine, willfully and against the US mandate, invaded and destroyed Libya, Syria, Afghanistan, and Iraq? George Orwell, 1984. The past was erased, the erasure was forgotten, the lie became the truth. I am passionate about Tchaikovsky's works. I heard Swan Lake and then Nutcracker Suite when I was a child. My mother played the works until their magic exploded something within me. Their music flung open worlds for me. Tchaikovsky and his art have delighted and intrigued millions of others for more than a century. To have all this grandeur reduced to a petty point-scoring opportunity is quite informative. Considering everything else that had happened, I did not understand why this news irritated me so much, but after a while, it started to make sense. My ongoing artistic quests take me to the interstices of the varieties of African histories, the ruins, the stories, attainments, memories, and obscured ways of being. The World Federation of International Music Competitions Act became for me a site of information and witness. These are acting according to a 500-year-old script and impulse, the willful erasure or appropriation of the achievements of other cultures that a hegemony impetus regards as hostile to its interest and mythology. I had wondered how it was possible for sane human beings experiences the edifices of immense civilization and cities in Africa had succeeded in convincing themselves and the world that nothing had existed until they showed up to burn these to the ground. How were they able to delete their memories of reality? How did they implant a pathetic and anemic fantasy that unfortunately still informs Africa-world relations? So much so that a French idiot would, in 2007, show up in Dakar, Senegal, to declare that the African man has not yet entered history. Idiot, because in his home country, the museums are full of the art and history his antecedents plundered from the continent. Idiot, because he knows that for the victory parade in Paris post-World War II, they had to hastily search in Morocco for enough white European men to march through Paris and enshrine an image of triumph that erased the faces and bodies and lives and works of the actual non-Europeans, and especially African soldiers who had given their energy, life, to secure a war victory for Europe. An entire nation willing to bear false witness to itself. And despite knowing this man, this idiot, felt empowered and entitled to spout drivel in the African place from where most of these deleted soldiers had come. As you can hear, cancel culture is not new. It has just gone mainstream. And how? Now try and imagine if there was no social and alternative media today, and the only site and source of information were from sanctioned mouthpieces. Within a decade, believe me, we would be studying Mr. Peter Tchaikovsky, with an E, great Swiss Silesian composer, and his famous work, The Dancing Goose, while a new generation would be taught to sneer at Russian barbarism or whichever dehumanizing adjective fits the mood. It is the unreasonableness of this, the wrongness that got to me. That outrage, the resistance to historical rebranding informs this version of a call to witness. It is needed for our times, you see. It is informed by experience lest another race and people are forced to ward off for another century monkey grunts, grimaces, and gestures in public places because of a culture's collective collusion to lie, to dehumanize, to question another's right to exist, their stake in history, their contributions to the earth. These are the options that the descendants of conquered peoples, lost to unjust wars that have never quite ended, us, whose victories become the intricate web that upholds the world, a world to which we are all now attached ideologically, geographically, militarily, and economically offer. Even as we sing anthems of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law, or as the latter is now known, the rule-based international order as defined by the Anglosphere, we bear witness to this truth too. We are the descendants of a wrongfully conquered people. We might thrive in areas where we find some purpose, but we are also tribute payers to varying degrees to the matrix that for now oversees the world and insists on defining its rules and more sinisterly, its values, ethics, morals, meaning, what history is memorable, who is designated as sacrifice upon whom bloodlust is satiated, who gets to live, die, and access justice. So, out of the depths of the ruins, I too cry out to you, you tribe of humans, and to the halls of eternal hearing, these depths that we have made home, our world. We lurch from crisis unto crisis, most of it manufactured to serve the interest of a bored cabal whose favorite weapon is fear. Our anxious world subjected to a reality fraught with existential, moral, environmental, technological, ideological, mythical, intellectual, philosophical, spiritual, and imaginational disquiet. A reduction of life into a tradable commodity that does away with the immense question that we answer in our various quests for meaning. We are informed that one type of life has a higher currency than those of others. How obnoxious. What a massive failure of the human collective to live up to its vocation of being custodians of a life. How have we allowed a 500-year-old delusional mindset that designed itself to plunder the earth and its wealth under the nonsense of an inexorable march of progress, whatever progress is supposed to mean? How did we believe it to this point in time in which George Orwell would have been appalled to live? The stench from the abyss to which we have driven ourselves suffocates the planet. What is evil, much of it unacknowledged, roams our world unhinged. We have collaborated with it, though, cohabited with it, excused it, projected it upon others so profitable bloodbaths could be launched. We think nothing about horrendous profits that the weapon manufacturing sector makes, even when we understand that behind every cent acquired is a destroyed human life. We have chosen to be entertained instead. Entertainment is good, it's not at fault. What is unworthy is how we use it to bury the screams, the shrieks, the wailing of our wounded, murdered, haunted, our dead, the groaning of our despoiled earth. It is enough. So yes, out of the depths, this ordinary human being cries out in defiance, for it would be most intolerable, most unbearable that the last word of what it means to be human on earth were to be given over to a nihilistic ideology of being, a preternatural evil. In the recent past, I harped on about the hope of a collective able to deploy its imagination to devise a new story, another myth of us in the world that would offer paths to wholeness and inscribe perhaps a kinder atlas of the Earth's future. One of my young friends here in Berlin told me that she thinks it is too late for this. She's one of those my generation should be apologizing to for robbing them of their right to freely inhabit transcending dreams. I was startled by that. At her age, I was fantasizing about designing cars that could fit photosynthesize. She was heading to the main library to borrow old books to reflect on what a nuclear war might mean for her generation. I left our meeting quite disheartened. If this is so, what remains? What might endure? Plenty suggests time, history, and the ancestors. I hope they are right. Of these, I choose one to reflect on with you. That is witness. I used to get nervous about the word witness. After Sister Monica, I was in Standard 3, informed our class that another word for witness was martyr. Images of buried, boiled, stoned, lion-eaten, poisoned, gassed men, women, and children, the martyrs, would come to mind every time I heard the word witness. I was determined to admire these from a very, very far distance without ever inquiring into or desiring a taste of their fate. But I realize now that fate happened to them when they were on their way to somewhere else. To be human is to witness, knowingly or unknowingly. I imagine a definition of witness suitable for our age and time, which means witness that is an asymmetrical instrument to disarm or dilute dominant and seductive death mythologies and their war liturgies. To echo William Blake in his Auguries of Innocence, a witness with the power to see a world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wildflower, a witness that will hold infinity in the palm of our hands and eternity in an hour. Also, it is truth too that in the depths, other life forms may take root. In this time of roiling, we are aware, some more reluctantly than others, of a wind shift turn to the epoch, the heralding of another way of being. Perhaps a season with a scent of multilateral multipolarity in the air and spaces for pluriverses. To the culture that still plugs itself as the site and source of human meaning, even as the earth now dangles over an abyss, specifically because of its choices. Well, for this culture, this reads like Armageddon. Historical patterns, the fractals of time, are not kind to such resistances, you know, and they do seem to work against intentions to sustain an old, impractical status quo. In other words, those whom the gods want to destroy, they first turn mad. For example, today, against expectations of previously indisputable power of socially destructive financial weapons of sanctions, the ruble is trading stronger than it has been for a long, long time. The situation has, unlike the past, also given new impetus to the yuan as an option to dollar hegemony. Hoisted with one's petard, although the jury is still out, this is still a cautionary tale. The historical forces on the prowl are also non-conformists. We see that new bloc formations that seem to have been waiting for just such an excuse as this time offers are also consolidating. Manifest destiny and exceptionalism notwithstanding. Amidst all this, we are also conscious that a mighty showdown by primarily the Anglosphere against China and its ascendants feels and seems almost inevitable. Madness, yes, but according to the running script, that too is tolerable. But what does it mean for us, the rest, the resistant? How do we proceed to read this sort of world while also aware that we have been co-opted, whether we wanted this or not? You have probably already heard of what is still euphemized as cognitive weapons. Yes, friends, that is actually a thing, also known as neuroweapons, defined by James Giordano as anything that accesses the brain to be used to contend with others. It involves what is reduced to the 3 A's: access, assess, and affect. In other words, hijacking the human free will, which means our minds, emotions, desires, fears, wounds, perceptions are fair game to be instrumentalized to serve abstruse purposes defined by who knows who. Literal lunacy. Listen. Not even Judeo-Christians' God, almighty creator of all things seen and unseen, tampered with the human will. Not even figurative and actual Satan dared. Vampires do not cross thresholds without first securing permission. And yet? And so we slowly get a picture of the pieces that make up our ruins, the depths from which this cry emerges. It is one with halls of consent manufacturing, doublespeak, scapegoating, and turning swathes of humans into frothing lynch mobs that speak the same words, bay in the same tone for the blood of the same kind of people. What are we to do with this? There's a story that Chinua Achebe tells, which the splendid Kenyan visual artist Michael Armitage related to me in an interview. Michael, by the way, paints on Lubugo cloth. That canvas was used as a stretched mourning shroud by the Baganda of Uganda. There is little in our imagination that is deeper than death, and it is from here that this gifted artist finds the artifacts upon which to implant his colorful witness to life and being. I used his work to reflect on this piece because he embodies for me the idea of the artist as unfettered witness, who uses this mourning cloth of human thresholds to paint a story of time, place, and memory. It is possible to circumvent the norm, I see. As with everything else, witnessing from the depths is not a new idea. So probably this reflection is chiefly a cry to remember. Michael Armitage says of the cloth, I sought this surface for a long time, and after I found it, the bark cloth destabilized everything I had done before, but it opened up my work. I now have to contemplate and incorporate its surface to realize my own work. In the lead up to the Chinua Achebe story he told me, he said of the people of the country we share, almost everyone you meet lives in some way a heroic life. They go through so much with humor and love. There are also so many heroic lives that are unaccounted for, that seem to leave no trace when they leave. Here is where the fable he retold unfolded. It is from the book Anthills of the Savannah. Here's a simplified version. The leopard who had acquired a craving for a gourmet meal made a gourmet meal made of tortoise flesh, sought the tortoise avidly. Tortoise, quite aware of leopard's lust for his flesh, had managed to tread the earth with caution, staying close to the shadows as he traversed faraway roads that were far, far from leopard's usual roaming range. But as fate would have it, one dawn, Leopard, who was in a bad mood, was crisscrossing the savannah and turned down a lonely road. Lo and behold, there was Tortoise ambling along, eager to experience the brand new day. At last, Leopard exclaimed, I have caught you. Resign to your fate and prepare to die. Tortoise sighed. He had had a good run. Submitting to the inevitable, he said, Fine, but allow me a final request. Leopard, feeling magnanimous in his moment of triumph, agreed. Tortoise began to churn the soil with force. He scraped wide lines into the soil, creating holes, tearing and dumping vegetation over quite a significant radius. Leopard became alarmed. What are you doing? Why? He cried out. Tortoise replied, When I am dead and gone, all who pass by will bear witness to this place. They will read the ground and they will conclude. Two equal beings struggled. It was a good fight. A fine and brave soul met his match right here. In his book, Art and Faith, renowned artist Makoto Fujimura says, in art, we do not obliterate the darkness. Art is an attempt to define the boundaries of darkness. Witness is art. Now, there is another word that I overuse that acquires even more meaning as a method to make sense of this brave new world and its aftermath. That word is autopsy, the act of seeing for oneself, from French autopsie or modern Latin autopsia, from Greek, from autoptes, eyewitness, from autos, self, and optos, seen. And in support of this, the witness for and of this age becomes that of a pathologist, primarily also in an act of cognitive self-protection. Autopsy is arguably the most naked, the rawest in a hierarchy of the art of observation, wakefulness, and witness. The mythology used to embellish the human being disappears. Before another human gaze is the unadorned naked reality, corpse, mortality, decay, breathlessness, helplessness. The human faculties are allowed the power to render meaning to that which is before it, and when done correctly, it also becomes an act of humility. What option does the seer have? For that which they look upon is also a mirror. Seeing, listening, smelling, touching, introspection. Autopsy is a personal and intimate process that is focused on the individual. It responds to direct questions. True, the answers can also be mechanically manipulated to serve an alien agenda, but the truth is felt and seen. Manner of death may be assigned based on findings, but that, like literary criticism is a matter of translation and interpretation. The autopsy does not deny the fundamentals, that so and so lived, that so and so died, and in this manner, but most importantly, so and so lived. Here, the witness is, of course, an agnostic, devoted to one thing alone: truth, reality, fact, and is compelled in the clearest of ways to one of the most fundamental of humanity's questions: what is the cause of death? It was once imagined that the sum total of answers from individuals would complete a mosaic that would reveal the biggest picture of all. That is a question I also return to you all, my friends, to the students as well. What is the cause of death? But having said that, I could also ask you, what is the cause of life? Autopsy declares without needing to speak that something that also makes us cry out, declares without needing to speak that something that also makes us cry out from the depths, the wound of our human suffering. We are human, we suffer. The body suffers, the mind suffers, the emotions suffer, the ones we love and the ones we hate also suffer. There should be no shame in this. So then, maybe you know, how does it serve a dominant mythos to pretend that by manifest destiny or whatever, they are exempt from this human condition, that suffering is the preserve of mostly brown and Black peoples? Why would they do this to their own people? And why would a culture be so obsessed with quantifying especially the sufferings of others? It is so very odd. Anyway, I wanted a way to bring in the visitation of COVID-19. Here it is. Do you all remember the bizarre and macabre Euro-American meltdown and tantrum when African and Asian COVID morbidities turned out to be so much lower than theirs? It was uncanny. In our culture, only necromancers and warlocks obsess about the refusal to die of targeted others. Those malefic headlines, as if the three witches Macbeth were having a relentless hissy fit. Our hurting world had been called to reflect upon what this pandemic said to us about what it means for us to be human. But instead, these concentrated on but rather than concentrate on the nature of the suffering of millions, these turned it into a dumb game of one-upmanship. It is tempting to reduce it to the overfamiliar fig leaf racism. As insidious and slithery as that is, I want to argue that this idea is merely a placeholder for something far more malevolent, entitled, envious, wicked, dangerous, and invisible, and nameless. A demonic psychopathology and sentiment that wraps itself in words and pictures that do not merely gaslight, but also seeks to destroy. We need a better sounding, more enriching testimony and witness to our humanity, don't you think? We can't go on like this, demanding fantasy and false witness to satisfy strange whims. It is enough. We need the kind of seeing that can dismantle the endless games, the craving for and sense of entitlement to other people's wealth, success, that obsession with domination, all those idiotic comparisons, happiest people on earth, tallest people on earth, calmest people on earth, richest people on earth, the people with the longest legs in the world, the most righteous and worthy people on the earth. It's also damn insecure, all the noise, all the cacophonies. Don't you also want to cry out, enough? It is enough. The lunacy destroying even the little space of light left for us to use to search for the horizons of hope. It is enough. We are living in an unprecedented time. Global warming, the dying of the seas, the effects of climate change are so overt right now. The UN last week, as witness, pleading with states to please change direction, reduce emissions urgently if we desire a fighting chance to salvage the earth from its anguish. What do we do? What did we do? We launched a Ponzi scheme called carbon sequestration, But do we actually think that the rising mercury will halt because Italy managed to export 20 container loads of its radioactive waste to bury in Kenya's forests? How has it come to be that the meaning of the earth, the meaning of our own lives, is reduced to a conference and a footnote in documents? We imagine we would sacrifice our lives for those whom we love. Spaceship Earth is warning us with bright red lights that it intends to dump its passengers, except that the designated pilots have switched off the alarm and replaced it with numbing elevator music. And we prefer to trust in its anodyne suggestions rather than sacrifice our bloating comforts. What do, we passengers on the spaceship Earth, who are direct witnesses of its travails? What are we to do with our witness? I am curious about you. What I do with my witness is try to delegate it to the institutions and global bodies. It is soothing. I don't need to stop my ambitions, and maybe I can squeeze in another book before the planet goes boom, and hopefully exempts me from its apocalypse. I know that some of you hearing this might be startled, for all the recent prognosticators and their data automatically think that it is the African continent that will face the greatest destruction. In secret places, in whispered places, the sense is that the greatest destruction is likely to be in the places where the most dramatic climatic impacts have been on display over the last 10 years. Storms, hurricanes, heat waves, tornadoes, landslides, and wildfires and floods. Europe, North America, Australia, New Zealand, and Japan. It may continue this way or not. But still, I am tempted like others elsewhere to want to say, it will happen over there. And by the way, if one of you on your way somewhere happened to see a quiet elder called Noah building a large ship, he calls an ark in his backyard, please call me. I hear there are places for two. But more seriously, there is a precedent, at least in human telling, of one who did not laugh at the idea of rising tides or deny what he read and heard of the signs of the time. The biblical story of Noah speaks to the quandary of our age today, of the idea of witness who must be equipped to translate experiences and to act on this even against the consensus. Signs of the time. The COVID-19 was a significant and is a significant herald. What do we know now? That when the catastrophe comes, the world will not rally together to take on a common enemy or an existential threat. The witness of our human behavior during the COVID-19 upheaval is a truth barometer, our reality check. Self-interest, politics of privilege, mostly imagined, greed and vulture bonds trump an imagined will to solidarity, comradeship, and action for our collective good. There is something far more destructive and unnamed that lurks in the human heart, that will prefer to gamble with disaster in the hope that it can profit from it, even at the expense of all human life. Just saying it. I'm also trying so hard to believe that I am on the will to solidarity team. I apologize to the younger generation. We could have done better by you. Perhaps you will have the power of the imagination to pull the brakes, assuming you can wrestle control from the cabal that has locked themselves in the control deck. Nevertheless, you do have a chance because there is another witness from this COVID visitation. The reality that nobody actually knows what to do or what they should do or how. There's a lot of making things up along the way. It is true. I'm sure you remember when all that was needed to resolve the pandemic and halt infections was one vaccine shot. I know among us here, there are those who are on their fourth. This time it's really for real shot. What other qualities does a witness to our time demand? Witness as an act of minor exorcism. Exorcism begins when the haunting presence can be rightly named and the site of brokenness with a threshold it has taken hold of reclaimed. Witness is also alchemy, one of the transmuting arts. Our senses are deployed to experience and give frame to an occurrence, and to do so makes it live anyway. We can witness to what it feels when the story of a NATO drone strike in Afghanistan obliterates thousands who are then rendered nameless. And when the same group invite us to instead lament the, I quote, the blonde, blue-eyed, civilized like us types. A witness can ask, is this what life is supposed to be? Among our claim to our pluralisms, can we also lay hold of our shadows, the possibilities of my and your own capacity for and flirtation with evil? Would we be willing to witness without frill to woundedness, to our evanescence, to fragility, temporality, decay, to ordinary experiences, to uncertainty and to the unknown, to our relentless quest for immortality, our failures in realizing this, and always to ultimate reality, truth, goodness, beauty, and justice, to living with shadows that are within and without? Could we dare to witness to the factual reality of human suffering, and for the sake of all that is good, stop pretending that it is a condition confined to only a few in the world? We are all subject to the vagaries of the unknown, to mortality, to uncertainty, to the unknown, and yes, it hurts. It hurts, and that too is human. I am at present a temporary resident of Berlin, a bystander from another place. I've had the privilege of visiting a few other European cities in this time of our history, cities where there had been terrifying mass casualties from the pandemic. This is what I have seen. There are thousands and thousands of walk-in hubs and centers set aside for expensive COVID tests. There are no sites and even very few church doors open where the human, and they must be numerous, can meet another to speak about their losses, their absences, what it means when an entire neighborhood is moved to the cemetery, as happened in Italy, in parts of Italy. I'm not judging it. I am merely making a note of what I see. It allows me to wonder then if the irritating Euro-American obsession with African and Asian casualties, death and dying is not just about contempt and projection, but also comes from a real human need to speak to someone, anyone, even tangentially, about the woundedness of our human temporality. Back to the earlier references of homes and lives built upon necropoli, in the many texts and traditions referring to the unrequited dead, it seems that their shared longing, these dead, is for witness, to have a strand of the story connected to their dying and death told and maybe remembered. Witness seems to be a light-bearing venture, it seems. A friend who is also online here sent me a TikTok vlog of a bird, a woodpecker, I think, that was frantically battling to death its reflection on a window. It is the perfect analogy for our age, isn't it? Might we be the witnesses that will dare to enter the labyrinths of our assorted secret lunacies, to confront our minotaurs, to name, fight, and kill, or lead them out tamed? Do you think we could stop the sickness of outsourcing our demons and casting these upon single persons? Putin, of course, is the latest one. Before that, it was Gaddafi. At some point, it was Assad, Saddam Hussein. There are never names like Thomas Jefferson, Margaret Thatcher, Colin Powell, George Bush, Tony Blair, Winston Churchill, or King Leopold II. Why? To witness is to climb down our bloody pedestals and free ourselves from the bullshit we are invited to subscribe to without reflection or critical thought. Witness understands that a situation is a prism emitting different perspectives that are not necessarily obvious to those who stand only on one side. Witness needs an element of prognostication, a reading of the entrails or tea leaves to anticipate the next chapter. Witness is the antidote to the programmed instrumentalization of the mass fear of death that keeps us in a state of suspended animation, where we are supposed to outsource our critical faculties. And the witness is an attached, not a detached observer who is creatively oppressed by the question, what does this say about what it means for me to be human? For you to be human, to go even further to ask, what new questions are offering themselves to me, to you, to us in this situation? It is to also ask, what do we see? How do we see? What do we do about what we see? What does that which we do see demand of us? How is what I see different from how another sees it? And you know what? That entails a dialogue, a conversation with that other one, the holder of a different prism. To conclude, a personal anecdote, if I may. Maybe this has to do with finally letting go of the quest for perfection and giving oneself over to the power of a theology of brokenness. 2 weeks ago here in Berlin, where the unease of this ongoing war and the bestirring of old forces feels so tangible, perhaps driven by a need to enter into the sense of another time and liturgy, I entered into and immersed myself in the Holy Week liturgies. Suddenly, for a week, everything felt new, poignant, profound, and timeless. The artist with her soul antenna out finds her fragility in the fragility of time, and yes, even the fragility of God, and with existence trembles at the approaching darkness. The long season of the virus, the messy end to 20 years of lives wasted in Afghanistan, the hurtful gaslighting of our nations in a time of pandemic pain. This war, the soundtrack of overloud laughter of well-dressed pundits and commentators who are hashtagging and selfie making with the shadow of the iceberg that our spaceship Earth approaches. My dreams had become those of flight and fire. There had been a feeling not of doom, but inevitability. The choice, the will, maybe the poignancy was fueled by my craving for light, for reassurance that the cry from the depths had a recipient. I craved the light, so I took myself to the night of the great vigil of Easter service. In that liturgy, there's something called the Exultet, where the cantor proclaims, among other words, let all corners of the earth be glad, knowing an end to gloom and darkness. The cantor continues, this is the night of which it is written, the night shall be as bright as day. Dazzling is the night for me and full of gladness. The cantor adds, the sanctifying power of this night dispels wickedness, washes faults away, restores innocence to the fallen and joy to the mourners, drives out hatred, fosters concord, and brings down the mighty. The cry of an unknown and unseen cantor calling from a darkness not dissimilar to the depths in which we do find ourselves. This is witness too, you see. Remember what Leo Africanus said, for nothing human is alien to me. And yes, it includes this generous affirmation I heard on the Saturday night of April 16th, 2022. Let all corners of the earth be glad, knowing an end to gloom and darkness. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. I feel deep breath is needed before we start asking questions. I have various questions of my own, but maybe we can start with one that is here in the Q&A by Leanne Brown, poet Leanne Brown, who says, stunning talk. To expand on witness and art, can you say more about how you see our daily practice as artists, how those could transform? No. How you see our daily practice as artists can transform, how our practice as artists can transform and better make world-changing art.
Thank you for your question. It's a question that I also, in many ways, wrestle with, particularly at this time. And just the other day, actually, just literally 2 days ago, I was struck by, I'd gone to an art exhibition, and I was struck by, it was beautiful in its own way, but I was suddenly struck by the need to see the human face and the human body, not the abstraction of it. And like I say, it is absolutely exquisite art, and I love the colors, and I really do prefer the kind of impressionistic stuff. But suddenly, in the middle of the exhibition hall, I just felt the need to. Where is the art of the? I'm wondering, what is the art of the human? How are we looking at ourselves as humanity, as human beings? So I really don't have an answer, but I think maybe a sense of a greater consciousness, the engage, the openness to the time in which we do find ourselves, to be sensitive to its its fragility. Yeah. I'm sure you also. I think many of us are. Actually, I'm surprised. There are not too many of us. I met politicians that are really not conscious of the fragility of this particular time. But those who are, perhaps there's a way in which they can be expressed. And usually the fragility itself speaks. And to make ourselves open and vulnerable to the hearing, to the sensing, and to dare write those things, or those of us who are writers, to paint, to draw, to sculpt those things that make us tremble a little. In many ways, just, I guess, to witness to the time of the earth in which we do find ourselves.
Thank you, Yvonne. I also have questions, but I will elevate this very thoughtful and clearly written question from the chat here. And though it's written out and all can see it, we do like voicing the questions.
Thank you. Yes.
So this is from Peter Owuor, and forgive me if I'm mispronouncing the last name, a journalist from Nairobi, Kenya, titles this question, Moral Clarity and the Truth. And there's a quotation here: can one have moral clarity without factual truth? This question was one of the key issues in a Reuters lecture that happened earlier this year. It was spoken in a panel discussing impartiality, newsroom diversity, and trust in news. The fact of our world today is that the truth can be stretched and it can be distilled into something else entirely before being shared to billions of people across the globe. Lying has become easier. In fact, sometimes you don't even have to lie. You just have to deny the truth, and your denial can be assumed to be the truth by others. So 2 questions here. 1, if factual truth and moral clarity are closely linked, which they are, what does our easy acceptance of alternative facts, misinformation, outright lies, and imitation say about who we are? And the second is, can one witness without moral clarity?
What beautiful questions, really. And actually, I'm glad you amplify them, because I think these questions need to be amplified again. I'm glad that the questions at least are being asked, because that's one step, I think, towards the I think the place that we long for. I don't know if I can. I mean, again, it's one of those questions that that would take a long time to answer. It becomes an ongoing quest. But at the heart, at the core of some of this, are what you call it, or what we have come to know as the transcendentals. I think the simple questions, in confronted with a situation: is this true? Is this good? Is this beautiful? And also, is this just? To return to that space and place of the ideal that has been distilled, and that all cultures, you kind of settle. It's kind of a space that cultures settle into. We are conscious. We, to be honest, Peter, as human beings, we know when we're being lied to, and we know when we're receiving that which is a lie, because immediately we start to make compromises with our consciousness, right? And that's why the point of witness also as a site of introspection. If we'd had more time, perhaps an exploration of what introspection actually means. It's an engagement with the innermost being, the innermost self. There's a question once, my late father had been given a chance to benefit from a very dubious deal. And he threw the person out of his office. And I remember one of my younger sisters saying, "But Daddy, why did you do this? You know, who would have known?" But my late father said, "Every night I have to sleep with my conscience." So there are these aspects of our being that seem to have been amputated from our general conversations, conscience, consciousness. And perhaps the call to witness is a call to the, if you want, the remembering, the reconnection with these in order to test the reality that our fact or the idea that's being put before us. And anyway, given the fact of the weaponization of our minds, of our emotions, it almost becomes an act of necessity, lest we get drawn into wars that we don't even understand, lest we will be turned into a thing, an object. So yeah, if factual truth are interlinked, I don't know if that quite answers your question, but yes, I was saying to return to the realm of the transcendentals. Can one witness without moral clarity? One can witness, and one can then choose the lens through which to witness. That which is, it's a bit like the word autopsy. You will see that which you need to see, and it is undeniable. You can then choose to lie to yourself. And that then becomes a matter of conscience, isn't it? Yeah.
Thank you for that. I wanted to ask you, Yvonne, towards the beginning of your talk, you said these remarks sprang from a sense of urgency as opposed to well-formed thoughts. And I'm interested in having you elaborate a little more on that distinction between the sense of urgency and the well-formed thought. In particular, maybe in relation to what you said about autopsy, since you just invoked the word, because when one thinks of autopsy, when I think of autopsy, I think of cold dissection in a way, and you spoke of it in terms of the senses, right? Seeing, yes, listening, smelling, touching. So there's this kind of these dual things that are not necessarily contradictory, and I'd love to bring that to bear on urgency versus thinking.
Yeah. I usually take at least 3 months to prepare a keynote, for example, and it tends to border on the academic and with references and cross-references. This came out of the reading the Tchaikovsky text, to just elicited this outpouring of emotion, really. And actually, that's why I changed. As I told you earlier, I changed the PowerPoint, because it then became a note, a reflection of the heart, which I thought, okay, let me give this voice. Let me witness in a way to this moment, to this Tchaikovsky, the removal of the Tchaikovsky competition, why it matters, and what answers it provided for me in many ways. It gave an answer to the question, how was it possible that entire civilizations could, if you want, erase the witness, the real witness, their own witness of the civilizations they encountered on the African continent, and say, this is how it's done. It's simply done. It's institutionally done, and it sits there, and it's done, and it sits on moral outrage. So that was the kind of the outpouring. So yes, that's when I said the urgency, and it was more like a gut. It was rather not written from the head as much as written from the gut. So that's yes. And as I was writing it, there's a sense of running towards something, of urgently needing to shoot, to speak this, to announce this, so to say. Yeah.